Hi, this is Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek, and you're listening to the FSS Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the FSF Podcast. I am Tim. I am your host. Kathleen and Ben we'll say they're on assignment just because they're slackers and neither one of them are here today. But in the meantime, I get to slacker assignment. Yes, they're slackering on their slacker assignment. But my guest today is someone who's no stranger to many Star Trek fans. You may know him as Dr. Trek due to his knowledge of all things super cool and Trek related. Not to mention that he has not but one, but two podcasts on the Roddenberry Podcast channel. That's Trekland Tuesdays and the Trek Files. So you can check them out there. But there's also the documentary. There's the Con of Wrath, which I'm excited to talk to him about because that's got some really super cool wordplay, and I love wordplay. But without further ado, kids, let's welcome to the show Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek.
Wow. Well, Tim, thanks for having me on. And yeah, we'll just show them what they missed.
Exactly. Suck it, losers. Anyway, okay. I've been friends with them a long time. I can pick on them. That's the way this thing works. I always say Kathleen's the little sister I never wanted, but somehow ended up with. So, Larry, one of the things I like to do in the start of almost every interview that we've ever done, it's kind of become the mode of operation here, is I'm a person who likes to know what makes people tick, why they do what they do, why they got into what they got into. Especially if they have a career or a love for something that takes them in a specific direction. And clearly, with all things Trek related that you've been involved in, that's been something that's happened with you. So what was your introduction to the Star Trek world, and what keeps piquing your interest to make you come back to it?
Well, it's an old story, but I'll share it with you. I blame Star Trek. I was a NASA kid before I was a Star Trek kid. And I go back to being a kid and a teenager with Star Trek. And I was, it was the time I grew up in, but it was the time when the Mercury and Gemini and Apollo launches and all of that. And I mean, the closest thing, if you can watch, Apollo 13, if you can watch the Astronaut Wives Club, if you can watch Right Stuff, and it's that era, it's like everybody would drop everything and run in to watch the launches, and then in the moonlight, but that was the time. And somewhere along the way, grade school, I also was a huge history buff, and I liked sci-fi, but I didn't think about it and I'm talking about it as a kid, grade school, junior high, middle school, and I didn't think of myself as a sci-fi fan. I would read some, but what it really was my ninth grade teacher, my science teacher in ninth grade, Mrs. Pollard. One day goofing around, and she had and she was a first year teacher. She was like right out of college, one of those, up and coming. Anyway, she was goofing around with a couple of, I feel like I say pets. She probably had 8 or 10 pets in this class, and including me. But long story short, she was goofing around with a couple of kids, and I didn't know what they were doing. But basically, I said at the end of it, she said something about Star Trek, and I said, Star Trek, is that the show with the guy with the ears? And she said, I'll never forget this. She looked at me, she said, oh, Larry, don't tell me you don't know Star Trek. She says, I want you to go home right today and watch, because we were in rerun era. So it was like, it's on at 4, go home and watch it today. And I actually watched, it was still on Saturday morning NBC, the cartoons, the animated, and I watched those first before I watched. But within a couple of weeks, I was hooked. And it's amazing to me, like Star Trek pioneered so much in the culture that are paradigms now. And it's so trite and easy to say that. And at the time, I didn't think about this. And then the years go by, and we have Star Wars, and we have everything nerdy explosions, and we have, MCU, and comics come out of the closet, and all of this stuff. And we switch over from, those Star Trek kids to the geeks won. And now not only did the geeks win, it powers an economy, and cities compete to have Comic-Cons and go out and try to start one for the tax revenue, because of the people, the bodies. I mean, the whole thing has flipped so much, but back in the day, some people thought they had to stay in the closet with it, but some people, it's just like, you just knew you had your friends and all that. Anyway, it's so flipped. It's hard for people to understand back then what it was. And some people get really, if you watch Free Enterprise, like the kid that wore his Kirk shirt to school and got beat up for it,
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, but that was kind of the era it was. And what's just evolved over time is how at the beginning, like I was a history kid and a NASA kid, and I didn't think about these things at the time, but today we can put labels on things. And Star Trek, I say Star Trek, um, but with the things like the Well Committee, like we didn't know what we didn't have. We didn't have computers and databases. You went to the library, you got a book and all that. And Star Trek, like so many people needed so much information so fast over a broad area that wasn't common. I want to say Star Trek helped invent the internet, but it was paper and stamps, the internet and human.
Mm-hmm.
We talk now about, we have these terms for what we enjoy about our genres and our franchises, and IP and world building and memes and shipping and all the little terms we use that slash fiction even okay.
Right.
And Star Trek like pushed that. I mean, and you think like what it had like movie stars, singers, but shows, movies. There were, and if a fan club came along, it would, be hot for a year and then fade. And nothing was like Star Trek to grab people, young people, yeah, but lots of, even back in the day, lots of middle aged. Gene Roddenberry talks about how airline pilots and accountants and lawyers and doctors would hit him up in the 60s and 70s even about Star Trek. So it wasn't just the kids, but the kids got the attention, and then conventions and all that. So I mean, there's so much that Star Trek drove that at the time we just kind of, some of us that were there lived through it, and then things just evolve. It's the frog in the pot, only in a good way.
Right.
And now look back and try to explain. It's kind of what I enjoy secondarily now, is not just doing the stuff and the research and the dot connections and the archiving or recording now, but like this whole mission the last few years has turned into um, bringing the context. That Discovery episode, context is for kings. I'm like, no, context is for paupers. It's like, because when we do the Trek files, like one of the things, it's not just talk about something old because it's cool. It's like, how is it relevant to today? How does it shed light on when there's some big fan debate now, or you have people up in arms, or even, the not humans, the bots and the trolls. And that's, I mean, there's the thing in our face that's immediate, but if you can bring some bit of history to it, which is what I am anyway. I'm a huge Will Rogers fan, and it's
Okay.
amazing what he talked about in the 20s and 30s and made people laugh, and then they kind of cried at the end, maybe like laughed through their tears, maybe. So much, whether it's War and Peace or economic depression and boom and bust, or whatever, politics, religion, all those things. It's like, none of this is new, gang. Like, we've been through this before. It doesn't have to
Right.
be
Yeah.
scary. It's just our stupid ignorance of, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And in a
Mm-hmm.
microcosm way, that's the way I am about Star Trek. It's cool because it's historic and, nerdy and sentimental, but at the same time, there's a lot of worth to know. And so that's kind of what I went through. And I'm going to shut up here in a second, but I went through a
No, you're
long
doing great.
time of looking at when the internet got out, and it wasn't like you had to go hunt down a newsletter or subscribe to a magazine every day. You had the world's headlines thrown in your face, and that included, the Trek headlines, now that we've got so many
Mm-hmm.
good news sites. And there are times when I went through a long time, 10, 15 years ago, when I'd see a headline, I go, this isn't news. Like, that's 15 years old. Or, well, yeah. And then it was like, you idiot, you've got people that don't know. Like, not everybody lived in the 90s, much less
Right.
the 70s, you know, and or watched Next Gen DS9 Voyager Enterprise on its first run. And so it was like, that's, watch out for your unintended arrogance there, Larry. So it goes from people who are, running around, oh, look, this is cool. And it's like, well, no, it's not new. It's cool, but it's not new. To, oh, this is another reminder that through no fault of their own, not everybody has lived forever. So,
Right. It's
so
new to them.
that's kind of, yeah, it's new to them, and it's a mission. And it's not just that something is new from its time. There may be sometime midpoint or something going on right now. So anyway, that's a long-winded way to say that's, originally Star Trek scratched an itch. Like I said, I was a history buff and a NASA buff, and the thing about Star Trek that got me more than, I was not a comics fan. I was in a comics to me were one-off wacky people running around and like superheroes, and everybody's different and everybody's got a different superpower. It's like that's not real. And I know Star Trek isn't real either. But to me, Star Trek was us in the future, and it just ticked the right. It made sense. And when Gene would say, "Well, if we want to have cool sci-fi in the future, what that means is we learn to get along and not blow ourselves up." And some people
Hmm.
would look at that as their mantra for the '60s. Like, yes, it's a hope. It's Star Trek is a hopeful future that's diverse. And I was always, and maybe it was privilege, but I was always like, well, yeah. It's like, well, yeah, if you really want to be rational and not just Buck Rogers about it,
Right.
yes, if it's going to be us in the future, obviously we didn't blow ourselves up, or there's no point. Like the story doesn't make sense. Like we just popped that in. Like, of course, we either killed the planet or we killed each other, or we didn't and learned to get along and go. And now we're going to do all this cool stuff. And so the thing that drove so many people to be the original wave of fandom, like, oh, Vietnam and Watergate and the ecology and all of that and civil rights, it was kind of
Hmm.
like, yes, those are problems, we need to work on them now, and Star Trek says we did. But it was kind of like, okay, now can we get into the cool world building? So that was my thing was, it was amazing how this universe was created. And today we call that world building and canon and all this stuff, but
Hmm.
to me it was like, I didn't even consciously think about it. But what crystallized it was when the blueprints and the tech manual and the medical reference and B. Joe Trimble's concordance, and it was like, oh my god, and reading the world of Star Trek, it's like, oh my god, they planned all this. They planned all this, you know. And that's what tickled me. And of course, I love the characters and the actors and all of that, and had favorites there too. But that's what really snagged me and drove a lot of my so in a lot of that first wave of passion, people were doing fan fiction and zines.
Right. Yeah.
To me, it was like, let's fill the gaps. Like, oh, the tech manual, let's fill some of these gaps in the tech manual. And oh my god, look at all these stars and planets and the concordance, and some of these are real stars. And this hasn't been organized, let's organize this. And so that's what drove a lot of me early on.
That's very cool. Yeah. So I was speaking of the kid who grew up in. I was born in the mid '70s. I was a kid in the '80s, and um, I remember like Wrath of Khan coming out.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first recollection of anything Star Trek, because I had watched some Star Trek on TV with my dad. The original series, replays, things
But
of
by the
that nature.
'80s, it was already starting to look dated, right?
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where they had everybody's eating and they've got the green cubes and the red cubes, and I was pretty sure those were Lincoln logs or squares of Jello or whatever they were.
Giant
But
marshmallows or something. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Um, but yeah, so I was never the kid who got into Star Trek at that age. I just I thought Wrath of Khan was a cool movie, but that was all it was to me, was a
Yeah.
cool movie. And it wasn't until a couple years ago that I actually started to really appreciate Star Trek, not only for the world building and the canon and all those things that you talked about,
Yeah.
but one of the things that has piqued my interest with Star Trek, because I grew up as a massive Star Wars fan. I'm a
Mhm.
tremendously large Star Wars fan. But one of the things that I
Well,
have
you can thank
appreciated.
Star Trek then.
Oh, I do know. I'm very
Yeah.
appreciative.
George got the last of his financing because Star Trek had just exploded.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
In a money way too. Yeah. The cons
right.
and the books
Hmm.
and yeah, the syndicated shows and reruns and all that stations.
Yeah, but it wasn't until the last couple of years where I was able to. The thing that I've enjoyed about Star Trek is that there have been episodes where I've had to stop it midstream, or I've stopped it at the end of the episode instead of just watching a bunch back to back, and I've actually had to sit and think about what that episode meant for me personally, what that meant
Mhm.
for humanity around me, what it meant for the future, all these different things. And as much as I love Star Wars, that has never been something that I have done at the end of a Star Wars episode. I was like, man, that was a really good episode. Man, that episode of Star Wars
Mhm.
that really kind of grabbed your heart a little bit, and all those type of things. But I have never sat down and went, "Oh, that's what that's about," you know. Especially when it came to the original series, because I'm not the biggest William Shatner fan, not a
Uh,
big Captain Kirk fan, but there were a few episodes, and especially in the original series, where I had to do that. There's the very famous and popular episode about racism, where half the face is
Yeah.
black, half the face is white, and it's different. And these guys didn't like these guys, and
And see, that
uh,
was never my favorite because it was to me back in the day with just the 80 shows. To me, that was like, oh, that was so on the nose. It was almost insulting. Now I know people
right.
like cling to that now. I mean, like you could go back to some of the other ones that were a little more, this was the era and just after of the Twilight Zone, and the morality tale with the
Mhm.
twist at the end. And maybe they weren't all with a twist on Star Trek, but the twist came partway through. And that's the thing. If you didn't get about the Sharonians and the black white on different sides, that was kind of a twist if you hadn't picked up on it, before that. But some of them, like Return of the Archons, and especially some of the first season shows, were more in that kind of allegory, metaphor,
Right.
Twilight Zone reveal twist kind of a feeling to it of the time that we've. It's almost like that style has gone away now. And there's very few times you have that,
Yeah.
even in a Berman era show, much less today. But yeah, um, yes. Well, I was going to ask you what were some of the shows that made you start. You said
So there
let
was
me
that
start.
one, and I don't remember the name of the episode, so forgive me. I'll have to give you a description of it. But there was a planet that was going through war and people were being told where to go for extermination.
Yeah.
So they would have to go to this place, and these people, well, this number of people, it was all done by computer. There was actually no bombs being fired. It was a civilized war.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
The
and then
computer war. Yeah.
yeah, and that episode was one that really made me stop and think, because I was like, they were so afraid of bombs and war that they just decided to like play a game of virtual chess, is how I looked at it.
Yeah.
And whoever won, okay, well, I knocked over your pawn, so that's 20,000 villagers, so they all have to go over to the thing. The whole thing kind of, at first I found the episode to be amusing, because I was like, wow, this is kind of a silly premise. But then the more I thought about it, I thought, there's a possibility that could actually happen in the future, that the agreement is, okay, we're not going to have nuclear warheads. We're not going to do these things to
We're not
blow
gonna have
up.
messy things. This will be so clean and
We'll
messy
be
and not.
so civilized. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was another one of the episodes that really made me stop and think for a while, because it was towards the end of the episode where it was like it all kind of, up to that point, I'm like, well, it's silly. Nobody's going to voluntarily walk into a thing so they can get vaporized. That's stupid. Nobody's going to do that. And then at
And
the end
now,
of the episode, and
yeah.
then at the episode, I'm like, it kind of hit me all at once. I was like, that could totally be a thing. Holy crap, this could
And
be a
see, it
thing.
went from being one-off people to whole mobs. See,
Yeah.
and that, then you get into, well, it used to be very historical and quaint, and now it's come around where it's not so much. But the whole history of the fascism rises in the 30s, and Nazis in
Hmm.
Germany. And the first they came for the Jews, and then they came for the labor unions, and then they came, and I didn't say because that wasn't me, and then they came for me, and there was nobody to that famous
Right.
poem. That's a little bit, kind of an elaboration of that same idea.
Well, yeah. And even with what we're going through, we don't get into politics a lot on this show, but even with what's going on in the world around us, it's especially on the nose for
What if
what's
we?
kind of happening today.
How are we even?
You know?
Because how do we even get off on politics with Star Trek? Politics.
Yeah,
I
I don't
love that.
understand how that could ever happen. No.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't understand.
we've suddenly made Star Trek political. How did that happen? What's
My two favorite comments when anything I hear about Star Trek is that when did Star Trek become woke? I love that one, because I'm like, if you're paying attention, it was episode 1.
right?
And
Right.
when did it become political? Later on in episode 1. So yeah.
When the Cage pilot had a female first officer in 1964, that's when it became. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
pretty much.
Just to
Uh,
just to start somewhere. Yeah.
exactly. So Larry, I mentioned this in the intro. Now I love a good wordplay, and when going through your website, I noticed that instead of the Star Trek II movie title, which we mentioned, Wrath of Khan, which is still my all-time favorite Star Trek movie, um, you talked about a documentary that you had called The Khan of Wrath. And so I am hoping that you could talk to us a little bit about this documentary, because I was reading up on it a little bit. And my only question is, outside of, can you tell me more about this, is, are the original planners of the con safe?
Yes, they actually went on. Well, so to some of your listeners may be aware that this has been like a project ongoing for basically 10 years, and it's
Okay.
mostly shot. We just need to finish it, and other
Okay.
things keep getting in the way, and life and pandemic and all that. And this is a good time. I've kind of de-escalated talking about it until we had some updated plans to say. But I'm just going to say that that's become like a number one priority right now in Trekland, in my world.
Awesome.
After kind of the media revolution here and getting some things set up, and the streams and the pods all getting going, and Portal 47 now is a going concern, that we're going to get back and get this finished, and I've gotten back with my editor. So for those who are saying, yeah, what about the Con of Wrath? It's going to happen. We've kind of just jumped in just recently to try to put a plan together to get it over the home stretch, because it has been a while. But the Con of Wrath, I'm thrilled you love the title, but it's not my title. It stems from the whole thing is about an actual event that happened kind of in the golden era. You were talking about 82. Well, this was 1982,
Hmm.
2 weeks after Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan came out in Houston, Texas, and some folks that were, doing fandom and cons at that time. One guy dreamed big and wanted to have the whole cast there, and he wanted to do it after after the Wrath of Khan. Um, and the dream was to have not just a convention, but a show, like a rock show for Star Trek, an arena show. And they did. They had all the plans. Everybody came except Leonard, and then he almost didn't, which is a whole story. But basically, the tagline is, this is from the golden era Star Trek. It's this huge show, this wonderful plan, historic, but things did not quite go as they were planned.
Yeah.
And that the title by the Sunday, that title kind of organically sprang up, although I have on camera the woman who said she created it with her buddy. They were all, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, Tim, but sometimes fandom can get real snarky.
Never noticed that at all.
Never
As a
noticed
Star
that?
Wars
Yeah.
fan,
Maybe this
as a
was a
Star
thing
Wars
of
fan, it never
maybe this
happened.
was an 80s thing then. Maybe it's
Must
just
be.
died
Yeah.
out now.
It's
Yeah.
faded away.
But by Sunday, she and her group were going, she tells the story about how they were going to dinner, and there were all these memes that were already happening. They were calling it, um, um, well, the name of the arena show, it was attached to a regular convention, which was Houston Con at the time. And the show was at a different venue. It was a ticketed arena show separate from the convention, although it was getting really synergistic by then. They were both affecting the other. And they were already talking about how the name of the show was The Ultimate Fantasy, because it was all the cast together finally at once in one place, which had come close before once or twice, but not happen. For one thing, it needed a budget so big, which was part of the
Right.
issue. But so it was The Ultimate Fantasy, and they were already calling it The Ultimate Fallacy, The Ultimate Fiasco, The Ultimate
Oh
F
boy.
Up. And this group was laughing about all these words out there, all these terms that had been floating around all weekend on Sunday. And she said, wait, no, you guys, no, we just survived the Con of Wrath. And they all died laughing. And they had enough time left that they went back, and there were, I guess it's still there, but at the time buttons were a big deal. And they went to a couple of button makers and said, can you do a I survived the Con of Wrath button? And they did. And some of those survived, and there's 2 or 3 different styles, and I have some of them. But
Cool.
basically, that's where the name came from. Like, fans
Okay.
came up with it that weekend. And then it was a Starlog did a story on it back in the day, and the local news was all over it. And then it kind of, and I know because it was my first out of state long drive convention trip. Like,
Okay.
I was out of college by then, and we had money. I had friends and buds, and we could, drive, and had money to go and do the hotel thing and all that. We were newly, independent with work, and I was there, but we only stayed one night. 'Cause one of the many, many threads of this was we only stayed one day, one hotel night, and came back. But anyway, years later, then somebody and it kind of faded from view, obviously, public awareness, except for those who were there. And yeah, about 10 years ago, I ran across a guy at a con. One of my friends said, "Hey, that thing in Houston you talked about, I think he was there too." And I went over to talk to him, and it turned out he was the stage manager. And come to find out, as we say in the South, come to find out that you mentioned the organizers. Almost every one of them were still around and still in Houston.
Okay.
And I thought, and at the time, I was trying to not be the word guy and start finding a way to be the media guy. Now, this is before podcasts, much less live streaming and videocast exploded.
Sure.
And I was like, okay, I want to not just be a word guy. I want to be, a media guy. I'll produce this documentary. Oh, I said, this is something that needs to be recorded. And then I thought, no, not recorded as in paper and pen and tape recorder. This needs to be on film and record
Yeah.
these people, archive them. And then it was like a bing, bing, bing light bulb. And I thought, no, this is your chance to not just be the word guy, get these people on camera and do a simple documentary. And I had just met the people that did Trekkies and a couple other early documentaries that were starting to be done. And it didn't have to be like a big production. So I kind of went at it like a shade tree project. We'll just do little bits along and I'll figure it as I go along. And I had had an editor and a cameraman DP who were friends, who said, "Oh, I want to help you with this." I said, "Hey, I got no budget. We're just going to do this a little bit at a time." And they're like, "Fine, that's fine. I want to work on this." So starting with making trips to Houston. And then as we found people, fans, dealers, and basically all the surviving cast. I only don't have Shatner, and I was waiting till the end to do that. But I have George and Nichelle and
Oh, wow.
Walter, and Harv Bennett was there, and it was
Yeah.
we wound up doing his last camera interview, and he was
Oh, wow.
fine. And I have Wendy Doohan speaking for Jimmy.
Hmm.
And of course, Dee and Carolyn were not, DeForest Kelly and Carolyn aren't there. A couple more, but we have a lot of the dealers that were there, the organizers, and some of the fans who were on crew that worked on committee, and then a lot of fans who were just attending. And there's so many wacky little sub stories to the whole thing. So I'll just leave it there. The biggest thing
Okay.
is now it's just a matter of get it over the finish line, Larry.
All right.
So yeah, I can't take credit for that title. That's just organically what it was. It's so good. I did do a logo where we basically took the Wrath of Khan logo and just flipped the words and did it. And I asked a couple of friends at the studio years ago if that was, like parody, but like, is the graphic okay? And they're like, well, you might tone it down a little bit, but I think so.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I saw that title and I was like, oh, that's just perfect. That's, for everything I've read about that con and everything I've looked into it, that is like the perfect title. So yeah, I'm very excited to see that come out, and I would happily sit down and watch that. So
Well, good to know. We just need to finish it. Yeah.
there you go. Okay. Well, you also mentioned something else a few moments ago, and there's also an image of it up on the wall behind you, Portal 47.
Oh,
I'm hoping you can talk to us a little bit about Portal 47 as well, because everything I'm seeing, this looks like not your average subscription service. This looks like it's pretty in depth and that there's a lot attached to it. And so instead of me trying to butcher it and explain it to people, I thought, well, you know what? We'll get it right from the horse's mouth. We'll let Dr. Trek tell us.
well, yes. And it took a long time to get there. But I told you where I came from, fandom. And it's
Right.
like, there used to be a magazine called Interstat that was kind of like the pre-internet days paper, right? And you could get Starlog, you could get some of the other magazines, and even fanzines, and read the letter column, and people get together. And before we're doing what we're doing right now, I mean, you communicated. You either saw people live at cons or your club meeting or whatever, or you wrote letters, right? And pen and paper or typing letters, gang, not just instant email, much less threads and whatever, and message boards. And I stumbled into it a few years in, but there was a woman put together. It was a LOC zine, LOC, Letters of Comment zine, and it was where people would.
Okay.
And it existed before, but this was Star Trek, and it was kind of a high. I don't want to be snooty patooty about it, but it was kind of like a high end back and forth, and it wasn't too high end because there were like arguments would go back and forth, and people would rage. And what was amazing was I was like, oh, this is this is getting out to see what people are talking about beyond my little circle here in Oklahoma, and or the people I knew even eventually in clubs and on the con circuit, regional cons I could get to. And here's what people are thinking and saying. It was also great for both rumors and also people confirming rumors. And one person, Dixie Owens, did a thing where she went through the trade page. She went through Hollywood Reporter and Variety and pulled things out about Star Trek and got them right there. So, in the days before Entertainment Tonight even was on TV, and you could at least get a little Star Trek current news from that. But all is to say that that's where I first saw kind of fandom and realized a couple of things. In fact, I knew this already. The first time I went to a con, after reading about it, like in the making of Star Trek, and you'd hear about the conventions in LA and New York. I'm like, well, I'm stuck in the Midwest. I'm never going to get to anything cool. And then, okay, maybe Dallas and Houston and maybe Chicago. And well, finally, fans were starting to do some conventions, Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And the first time I went to a con and went to the hotel and stayed overnight, my image was, oh, well, we'll all go and we'll take all of our manuals and our books, and we'll sit around and talk about Star Trek, like how it was made. I was so out of it. I was projecting me into the world. And when I went, I realized, well, they're talking about Star Wars and everything else, and literature and all the other old movies and all of that. But no one sits around and talks and pulls out their medical reference and their tech manual and their blueprints and their concordance. No one sits around and does that for discussion. I'm kind of an odd bird. And then when I got Interstat and started subscribing and reading the letters, I went, oh, 7/8 of these people are women all arguing about Spock and Vulcans and Pon farr. And there's like 2 or 3 other people in here that when I write a letter, they answer back to my letter. So I said, okay, so like I'm like, there's me and 8 other people in the country that care about what I care about. And the rest is all, which, to me, I was like, oh, that's as you'd read about the whole zine culture and the history and all that, it's kind of like, okay, well, hardcore Trek fandom in the 70s is all these women, arguing or debating or putting their zines together and doing fan fiction. And there's like 6 or 8 like me. Now I knew it wasn't like guys geeking out over ship porn or something. That was a thing. But like, I really wanted to talk about like the cultures and the planets connected to the cultures and continuity and all, the bits of the thing that weren't just flashy nerdy tech, but something a little more than that. And and putting a timeline together and doing a historical chronology and all that stuff. So I'm like, yeah, there's me and 8 other guys in the country, and they're the people that would like write me personal letters and all that. So anyway, that's why in 80, the famous Get a Life skit on Saturday Night Live sketch with Shatner. I remember watching that live and going, okay, let's see how much because this was the make fun of the Trekkie kids era, right?
Right.
And I remember watching that, and every time they would cut to the audience, it was like all these nerdy teenage boys in their t-shirts, right? And my first reaction to that, I was like, where are all the middle-aged women? Which was like, but I thought about this the last few years. I think that more than anything, I think that sketch that night on Saturday Night Live, with that audience, I think that really, up until then maybe, but for sure, crystallized people's image for the next 10, 15 years until it finally evolved of what the Trek audience looked like. It was all nerdy, pizza-faced boys in their t-shirts standing around.
I like Star Trek. Yeah.
Right. Who left them out of their parents' basement kind of a thing. This is what happens.
Who let you see sunlight? Yeah.
But I remember saying at the time, where are all the middle-aged women arguing about Spock and Vulcans? That's who a Trek audience is. And if you look at those, and that's why when anime and Hollywood superhero movies, both kind of merged to make Comic-Con culture and blow up the Comic-Con situation and blew up San Diego and then copycat cons. And when that kind of became the dominant thing, and it wasn't so much little sci-fi lit cons, or as I used to call them, lit snob cons, they were like Star Trek and media conventions where the emphasis was actors and all that, but they were still small to whatever. And then the explosion was, let's put all the fandoms and genres together, but it was led by, the MCU revival and the coming of anime going mainstream and overlapping. and there was a whole lot of and so you had like anime girls I'm saying that are doing, and then you had comic fans who were by and large guys, although I know there were, but I think that there was an attitude about 20 years ago, right after the turn of the century, of geek girls, and how geek girls are just fake and they're only cosplayers and all this, and it was a whole thing about,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there have been women in it's like women built Star Trek fandom, and Star Trek fandom built Comic Cons because they were the first thing to split off from old lit cons and talk
Yeah.
about, screened presentations, whether it was animation or, I'm not talking about what happened in Japan natively, but I mean here in the States,
Right.
there was nothing until Star Trek on a screen that was a regular show that was worthy of being anybody paying attention to. So anyway, there have been things over the years that I kind of laughed at, but there was a whole attitude for a long time about that. And I've totally gotten off your question. Now I'm trying to remember what you asked me.
Tell us about Portal 47.
Portal 47. So my thing, yes, sorry about that.
No, I love it. This
Um,
is great.
But here's the thing. All those years of me going, I eventually dawned on me what I enjoyed, and I didn't not enjoy. I enjoyed the stories and the characters and the allegory and the metaphor and the issues and all that. But it's not what drove me. And there's so many people that was like just manna from heaven. That was just like they were wandering in the desert, and it answered that passion, and on a huge scale. And that's awesome. And the world building of just Vulcans and Spock was enough to drive the creation of zine fandom, which and fanfic into zines, which led to the first Star Trek conventions, and that split, and the beginning of media cons. But for years and years and years, it was kind of like, well, it's just me and all that. And we were talking about what makes money. Like I would be sitting in cons. I remember the great Denver cons that late great Stephen Walker did, Starland and Starfest. And then we're talking about the 80s, and TNG's on a boom, and here's Jonathan Frakes on stage, and his Q&A. It was either Jonathan, I want to say it was him, because he's pretty aware, since you can tell now in his history by directing. But I want to say it was him, but people would, questions would come out of the audience, and he would say, you know what? That's a Michael Westmore question. Or you know what? That's a Herman Zimmerman question. Or you know what? That's a Brandon Braga question. And I would always say in my seat to myself, then why aren't they on stage? And I knew the answer. It's because if I did TechCon and I'd have 15, the designers, artists, tech, who really make the cake for the show, and the actors are the icing on top. And I'm not knocking them, but they always get the attention. Those makers of the shows that never get the attention are the ones who really give the actors the lines and the scenery to be in front of. But if you did that, no one would come. It's like, yes, we'd have this great convention once and we'd go broke. And that, that's one thing about the internet and YouTube culture and podcasting, is we've done that. But for years and years finally started to get down that road. But for years and years and years, that was frustrating me, because I did the Next Generation companion book. And I kind of did this shift between like archiving, the data points. But now we have all these terms, and like the Akutas had their encyclopedia, but that was my thing to do, was to flesh out that. And then I did my own concordance at the beginning of TNG, which the writers used, and it was the dawn of desktop publishing and laser printers and everything. And it looked cool. And Richard Arnold, Gene's like great assistant, saw what I was doing and helped me out with things like spellings when they were scripts, so I didn't have to buy a script. But basically, I was watching TNG when it debuted and doing Bijo's concordance for myself, my way, and selling it as a zine. And I do like 50 or 100 copies a year and sell it. But I got them into so the heart building at Paramount, the writers, because there was no memory alpha, there was no encyclopedia, there was nothing. And it made their job so much easier. And they would say that. Now I didn't get paid anything, but and I had letters going back and forth. And then I met Mike Okuda and Rick Sternbach that way. And they would help me with some bits. And then things happened, and too long a story shorter, that's where the companion came from, except that I didn't get to do just a straight encyclopedia. It was a making of, and I had to do it in 3 months, which stretched to 6. And I was terrified because I didn't want it to be crap. And I had in my mind the making of Star Trek book, and that was a huge high bar. And I had no chance to interview people, much less interview people from the first 2 or 3 seasons that all wound up getting mad and leaving, and all the chaos on the bridge years. who wouldn't
Right.
talk to me now, even though I was an official. So Pocket reached out. I wound up with a contract. It was amazing. I just had to do it so fast. And I was terrified that it would be, I know how fans are. Oh, they just slap Star Trek on that and want me to buy it. It's crap, you know. And I was terrified that it wouldn't have enough depth to it. Anyway, we got that done, and I pivoted from just backgrounding to that. And from there on, I kept it up even though Next Generation ended. And I kept interviewing everybody and got to know the whole Berman era, from Next Gen through Enterprise. And then the world blew up. Paramount divorce, Viacom divorce happened. The Berman era ends. There's
Right.
dead for Star Trek, and then my world blew up. Like the communicator of the fan club went away. Everything Star Trek blew up in the mid aughts.
Mm.
And the world was changing. We were going from dead tree media to digital, and there was no rule book for that. And for a long time, I was like, do I just go sell shoes now? Journalism. I couldn't go back to journalism because there was no money in that anymore. And I was the guy
Right.
with kids and a family and a rent. And I was like, what are the new rules? Well, we're writing the new rule book, but we'll tell you as soon as it's ready. Well, I have bills to pay now. So in my head, I had this Rolodex of people. Rolodex, people still use that term. I
Fair
had
enough.
all these contacts. I had all these archives of interviews that I hadn't done anything with yet. The magazine was still the British magazine, which became American when the communicator went down. I had that, but it's like, how do I make this an ongoing thing? Well, it took a few years, and then StarTrek.com, I worked with that, and then it went away and was dead for 4 years because of stupid
Hmm.
corporate stupidness. So for a long time, I finally met an entrepreneur coach who looked at creatives to help them make a business that instead of living contract to contract, you could be in charge of your own income, a steady income with what you knew creatively. And I said, can I take these pieces, the people I know, my own archives, the access, and my own bridging entertainment and fandom and journalism, which I never thought about as a skill until then, because
Sure.
a lot of journalists were good journalists, but they didn't know Star Trek to ask the right questions. And a lot of people were journalists and they knew Star Trek, but they didn't know how the entertainment industry worked and the
Right.
egos and the way people looked at things. And I realized that I had all of that, which is why I think wound up making me a success at this. But anyway, I had a coach that said, yes, don't walk away from all those assets and those tools and those skills. Here's what you can do. And that's what Portal 47 is to me. Now, to the outside world, 47 is like a mini con all year long with a bundle of features every month from my archives and getting to know the backstage creatives that you never hear from. And I say Portal 47 is for all the Star Trek fans who still have no idea how much Star Trek they still have no idea about.
Right. No, from what I was looking at, I just went, I think like $33 a month, I think is what I saw on your website.
Yeah.
If you pay for it at a yearly rate, but looking at what you get and the access that you get, I was blown away by what I was looking at.
Well, this is. I finally started to put down. And this is like a sliver, and this is probably 2 years old. But I wanted to put just our guests, and that's not the apex. We have roundtables. I share things out of my archives.
Right.
We have meetups when I'm at a con guest, and we have a whole perk that people a live dive. But it's like I've got Mike McMahon here, but Bob Butler, who just recently died, was my first open. And once a year we have an open house that's open to the public, and you can just come in and enjoy a big headliner type guest, and I have specials to join and all that kind of thing. But then we got down to like Steve Dierico, who was a security guard at the lot during Voyager and Enterprise, who has tons of stories. Basically, it's like here's just more layers, because I know where people, if you really become a Star Trek fan, you're there, you're glossy eyed, you love the actors, you love the characters,
Sure.
the stories. And of course, that's what the show is. But if you've gone around the block, if you've flown around the sector once or twice, and you're on your third or fourth rewatch, you can't help but start noticing whether it's, Gene Coon's name, or it's Ronald D. Moore's name, or what, and then you start looking at the final credits just because you're bored and you want something new to do, and you're not fighting Paramount Plus is shrinking the credits maybe, but you start
Right.
seeing those names and you just wonder. and then you see all those titles and you go, what is the best boy, or what is this, it all is a jumble. And why do they have so many damn producers? What do they all do?
Right.
And that's one of the things. So it's partly been about specific people and their specific contributions, but it's also like, what does their craft do? What does their job do? And how does it fit in to the puzzle? And a lot of them talk about the 60s and the 80s and today. We just had Mike Westmore Jr. I know Michael Westmore, but his son did all the Blinkies for Data and the Borg,
Okay.
and some of the Blinkies then, but he also went into into editing. And the long forgotten craft of all this is the guys that sit in the dark bay all day long, and they aren't flashy, but they do a big job. Anyway, it's so many niches to the show, but it's also like what they do. And then they can talk about the people they worked with. So some of the other names that we haven't heard from, some people who have passed, especially, people can talk about them. And, I'm always, whether it's Gene Kuhn or it's Michael Piller and a lot of other folks, it's like they've passed now. They're not around to talk about this, especially Gene Kuhn died so soon before any of this blew up. And, so it's like insights on the people they worked with. Anyway, that's kind of the apex. So basically, yeah, it's a backstage dive for folks who are ready for that, or they're intrigued and they just want to know more about the shows. And they're not going to get it at a con. It'll be a drip at a con if ever, or a magazine, and even a podcast.
Yeah. No, this is much more in depth than your average service or thing that.
And it's a great community too. The people who are there are so which I didn't even think about in the beginning, but the Portales is a really awesome community. We have our own private page, and yeah, and some of the guests come back and stay on the page and answer questions.
Oh, that's great. That's great. All right, Larry, I've got one final question for you. We like to call this our silly question. Okay.
You said no gotchas, but okay.
That's right. So we asked this because Kathleen, my co-host, was noticing that her 5-year-old daughter was getting asked this question, but she wasn't, and she was a little offended. She thinks that she should have been asked this too. So we're going to ask you, Dr. Trek, what's your favorite dinosaur?
I come from a time when this was not a burning question of all 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds. You know what, off the top of my head? I'm going to say a Brontosaurus. And yes, I know they're not called Brontosauruses anymore. But Brontosaurus...
Still Brontosaurus to me, damn it. Anyway.
Brontosaurus was a big feature on the Flintstones. I can still see the Bronto burgers. But I don't know. It just hit me that Brontosaurus are a little bit like Pluto. It's like, they used to be there, and now they're... I know they've just been renamed, not excluded by class,
right,
like Pluto. But I'm just going to... And maybe this will drive her crazy. But I'm going to say... the Brontosaurus.
Very good. That's a solid choice. And I think you're only the second person to ever have picked the Brontosaurus. We had one other.
Oh.
I don't remember who it was, but it wasn't that long ago. So I'd have to go back and look. But I can only remember one other person ever picking the Brontosaurus.
The other one is the one that's kind of short and fat, but has the big head spike, almost like a lion's mane if it was made into a dinosaur spine, dinosaur fins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't remember the name of that one.
I can't think of what they are, but you know what I'm saying?
I can visualize it right now, but I can't remember the name of it.
I think they've probably also been drawn and cartooned a lot, realistically and not realistically. Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. All right. So Brontosaurus, very good answer. We'll accept that. We'll log that into
That's my Flintstones level answer for you. There you go.
Very good. And being how you were from Star Trek, I probably would have also accepted Gorn if you would have said Gorn. So.
Oh, or the Voth.
You see, there you go. Either way, we've been okay.
In the Delta Quadrant, right? Yeah.
There you go. All right, Larry, thank you so much for being on our show today. Where can our listeners and followers go to find out more about you, your work, and anything you have upcoming?
Well, the central hub would be LarryNemecek.com, so you can get you to everything else, Trek Files and Tuesdays Live. Every Tuesday at 1 Pacific, my live stream on Tuesdays. And Second Opinion, when we've got Fresh Trek, comes out on the weekend. And I have my granddaughter, Alice, as Cadet Alice, and I talk about Prodigy on the episodes.
I love it.
There's all that, and then Portal 47, and our Trekland Treks location tours, which is a whole new experience thing for fans. Not the Trek tours at the stages in New York, but the locations around Southern California, and we do a customized tour with folks and work that out. but that's all at my website. But then also I'm still on X Twitter at Larry Nemecek, and YouTube especially. I got into it late, so YouTube, Larry's Trekland, and Instagram.
Very good. We'll make sure we put links for those down in our show notes down below so people can go check you out. And as a reminder, guys, this is your opportunity to click that awesome little subscribe button down there, because that helps ensure that our show continues to grow. We get amazing guests like Mr. Nemecek here, Dr. Trek, to stop by, have these great conversations with us, and enjoyable moments for you guys to listen to. So please not only click like and subscribe on this video and check us out, but please make sure to go check out Larry's work and go check out Larry's Trekland here on YouTube. You will not be disappointed by what you find. I guarantee it. I'm a subscriber. Anyway, but yeah, that's going to do it. That's going to do it for our show today. Larry, thank you so much. Guys, thank you for listening and paying attention. And yeah, goodbye.
Goodbye. Trek well, everybody.
Copyright 2024 FSF Podcast. Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF Podcast. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpodcast.com.